All right. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this joint webinar hosted by the Greater Madison MPO and the Capital Area Regional Planning Commission. My name is Zia Brukaya. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a planner with the Greater Madison MPO. We're going to start with a couple of housekeeping items and a short poll. First is that, and Ben, if you could go to the next slide. First is that everyone's muted. The webinar is being recorded. This webinar does support automated closed captions. So if you'd like to use those to start the captions, select captions, show captions at the bottom of your screen. The presentation slides and recording will be shared out after the webinar, probably within the next week. And both will be available for review also on the MPO website and the CARPC website. As we go along, please put your questions in the Q&A function. That's where we'll be tracking all the questions. If there are clarifying questions that make sense to answer during the presentation, we'll go ahead and do that. And then for the rest of the questions, we will try to answer as many as we can live. At the end of the webinar, we should have plenty of time for Q&A. So just drop those in there as we go. And then we have a lot of folks joining us today. So that's great. Different agencies, different organizations. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. And we're also going to do a short poll to get a general idea of where everyone is coming from. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that and give you guys a second to respond. Okay. Do like 5 more seconds. All right. Great, thank you. So this looks like a good range. So we have primarily local and county government staff, some elected officials at the local and county level, federal and state agency staff, quite a few interested community members, consultants, nonprofit representatives. So we've got folks from every area, it looks like, except for media. So thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing that. And yeah, so it's great to see everyone who's here joining us. This webinar is part of a joint series that is hosted by the Greater Madison MPO and the Capital Area Regional Planning Commission. We are partner agencies working together to align transportation, land use, and natural resources planning in the Greater Madison region. The Capital Area Regional Planning Commission, or CARPC, develops and promotes the regional development framework that you see there, provides data and supports local land use and water quality planning efforts. And then the MPO leads the collaborative planning and funding of a sustainable, equitable transportation system for the Greater Madison region, in part through the development of this regional transportation plan that you see here. So we're very excited to do this webinar series and make the work that we do more accessible. And we hope that this series provides some valuable opportunities for coordination and communication, both between our agencies, the local communities throughout the region, and then the public and other stakeholders. So I'm going to go ahead and hand this off to the director of the MPO, Alexandra Andros.
Thank you, Zia. Hello, everyone. It's great to see so many people here. This is great. And we all obviously, and people are still identifying themselves. We've come from a lot of different areas of expertise, which is great to see, and also different areas within Dane County, different communities. So I'm glad to see you here. Obviously, it's a really important topic, and it's a great opportunity for us to learn from each other as we work towards a common goal of improving the quality of life in our communities in the Dane County region, in the greater Madison area region. And I am happy to introduce Olivia Perry. She's a senior planner with Dane County Planning and Development, a place near and dear to my heart. And she is very much working in housing across the region. And we were planning on this together because of how these two things impact each other so greatly, and another thing for people to think about in the work that we do. So Olivia.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you, Zia, and everyone. Yeah, great to be here. I was the project manager. I'm a senior planner for the Dane County Planning and Development Department, but I was the project manager for the Dane County Regional Housing Strategy, a year-long strategic planning process to address the housing crisis in Dane County that we recently completed. As Alexandra said, we invited Ben to give this presentation at the RHS Housing Advisory Committee meetings, but ended up not being able to fit the presentation in within our work schedule. So I'm really excited that there's so many people here and we get to see this presentation. Building more affordable and workforce housing was a top priority and core value of the regional housing strategy. Building more sustainably, and building for climate resilience is one of the core values identified by the Regional Housing Strategy Advisory Committee. And this presentation, as you'll see shortly, addresses the importance of transportation and transportation planning, the intersection of those with housing, and how well-considered transportation planning can help us meet the dual objectives of greater sustainability and climate resilience and creating more affordable housing. We will be releasing the Dane County Regional Housing Strategic Action Plan with a kickoff on Thursday, January 25th at the Alliant Energy Center, so please stay tuned for more details. With that, I would like to introduce Ben Lyman. He's a transportation planner with the Greater Madison MPO, and he's the primary planner for transit and specialized transportation coordination, and assists with active transportation planning projects and provides support to local area transit and bicycle pedestrian planning efforts. He is the MPO staff lead on equity, Title VI, and ADA issues, a core member of supporting implementation of the MPO's public participation plan, and the lead staff for the Transportation Alternatives Program and Section 5310 program funding award process for the Madison urban area. He serves on the Dane County Specialized Transportation Commission and the University of Texas at Arlington Center for Transportation Equity Decisions and Dollars Advisory Board. Ben's background as a ski instructor, mountain bike and hiking guide, community inclusion specialist for disabled adults, and lifelong enthusiast of non-motorized transportation informs his planning work and his understanding of the wide variety of experiences people encounter as they attempt to travel through their communities. He has been a planner with the MPO for the last 5 years and has over a decade prior to that in local land use and transportation planning in Juneau, Alaska, and Salt Lake City, Utah. So Ben, I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivia, and thank you, everybody who's joining us. I think this is a record for our joint webinar series participation. So really great to have so many folks who are interested in this topic. And as was indicated, we do expect to have plenty of time for questions at the end. But this this journey, as we'll see, is going to kind of jump around a little bit. So if there's anything that's really pressing, please raise your hand or stick a flag on it, and we'll try and deal with it before we move on to a different topic. A little bit more about the MPO. For those who aren't familiar with this, we're the Designated Planning Organization, or MPO, for the Greater Madison area. We lead the collaborative regional transportation planning process with the adopted mission and vision you see here. The map shows the official planning boundary for the MPO, but we must obviously also account for travel in and out of the metro area as well as within the area. Some of our data collection and our transportation improvement program is countywide. The MPO is governed by a 14-member policy board with representation as shown here. The MPO coordinates with federal, USDOT, and state WSDOT agencies, as well as county and local governments to ensure development of a coordinated, connected, regional transportation system that is consistent with the shared regional goals previously identified in supporting policies recommendations, and strategies outlined in our regional transportation plan. In today's presentation, we're going to be looking at separated compared to mixed uses, accessibility and the travel time budget, housing and transportation costs, the street and sidewalk network, low-cost transportation options, including active transportation and transit, parking costs and impacts, travel modes for Madison and Dane County populations, and then we're going to put it all together with a couple different ideas, including 15-minute cities and transit-oriented development. So transportation and land use, there are a few major issues. People have to navigate the relationships between their travel time budget, their household budget, development, including land use and parking in their area, and often the outcomes are not equitable. New housing development needs to be located where land is inexpensive enough to make the project financially viable. This means that often, without incentives such as tax increment financing or affordable housing grants, new housing is located on relatively inexpensive land farther from destinations and services. During the development of the Connect Greater Madison Regional Transportation Plan, we met with focus groups from Sun Prairie, Bayview, and the Latino Academy of Workforce Development. Here are some of their comments related to how separated land uses and lack of transportation options affect their lives. And we see here about not being able to do other things because the car takes so much more of their money. They're not able to participate in community because of limited bus service. That one is, however, before the network redesign and 2 new bus routes serving Sun Prairie, so hopefully alleviated there. Hard to be involved with kids after school activities because of transportation. The car, they only use the car because it's the only transportation available. And then also from Latino Academy, folks who don't like to drive because it's scary. And since Wisconsin does not allow undocumented immigrants to have driver's licenses, can put them in legal jeopardy to be just to try and participate in their community. So the next poll, how much time do you typically spend commuting each day? This is both ways, not one way. I've got somebody with their hand up. I've seemed to have lost that. Too many things going on my screen.
Right. Oh, RJ here. Okay, RJ, you're unmuted if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment. It looks like the unmute isn't working. So if you would like to put your comment, oh, there we go.
Hello. I'm sorry. I have no comment. I've been trying to get on since noon and I've just now been able to get on. I had to update Zoom and everything else. So no
Gotcha.
questions. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks. I'm glad you could join us.
Yeah.
Ben, we have a question to clarify for the poll. Is this combined through the week?
Just average daily.
Like on average?
Yeah. Yeah. So, if you're telecommuting, then don't count that day. Count when you actually go to the office, please. Unless you never go to the office and you always telecommute, and then that's going to be less than 30 minutes probably.
Okay, I went ahead and ended the poll, so these are the results.
All right, before we end that, I want to take a picture of this because we're going to come back to it later. Okay.
All set?
So it looks like got about 60% of our participants 30 minutes or less. It's really, for round trip, that is pretty lovely. Not many folks in the United States enjoy that kind of commute. 19% at 31 to 45 minutes, 13% at 46 to 60 minutes. Those are all pretty good. 6%, 5 folks who takes them between an hour and a half. And 2 of you have longer than 90 minutes round trip commute every day. So you're gonna understand some of these next slides in a very personal way. I guess, okay, there they are. And Linda Horvath has got your hand up. Zia, can you unmute her?
Actually, I didn't have a question. I'm sorry. Sorry.
Well, all right. Good to see you, Linda. Okay, moving on here. So, land use patterns dictate transportation options. The image on the left is for separated uses, shows low density residential development. Although there are sidewalks, any destination is far away and only automobiles are visible in the photo. The image on the right for mixed uses shows a 4-story mixed use building with 1 to 3-story buildings with shops, restaurants, a theater and housing, with a bicyclist crossing the street and the Capital City Trail in the foreground. And as you can see, very different transportation options just because of the built environment and what's nearby. So accessibility. The travel time budget drives decisions about home and work locations. Most people are okay with 60 to 90 minutes of total travel time per day. There's an inverse relationship between proximity and travel speed. For short trips, slower travel speeds are okay, but as distances increase, speed must also increase in order to stick by that budget. This means that there are trade-offs where increased location costs result in lower travel time, and opportunity costs. Conversely, lower location costs result in higher travel time, and opportunity costs. A moment to look at those lovely graphics there. Courtesy of the National Highway Institute, Integrating Transportation and Land Use. I've stolen a lot of these graphics that you'll see from various other publications and institutions. Where possible, I've provided hyperlinks that you'll be able to use in the PDF once that is posted to our webpage. This one, you actually have to sign up for an account with the National Highway Institute to get this stuff. So no hyperlink here. This slide shows the breakdown of average household budgets in transit-rich neighborhoods at left, auto-dependent exurbs at right, and for average American families in the center. All 3 groups typically spend 32% of their incomes on housing, but transportation costs only amount to 9% of household budgets in transit-rich neighborhoods, while they take up to 25% in auto-dependent exurbs and 19% average on a nationwide basis. Historically, housing costs have been considered affordable if they are no more than 30% of a household's income. Many experts now suggest that a combined housing and transportation cost of no more than 45% of household income can be considered affordable. As this slide shows, just over half of Dane County households have a combined housing and transportation cost exceeding 45% of their household budget, so not considered affordable. Note that because this analysis assumes that all residents earn the same amount as a regional typical $72,374, this still may not give an accurate picture of affordability. Many areas with concentrations of low-income residents who live in areas with lower housing costs are considered to be affordable when they are near other destinations and served by transit, while areas with high housing costs, such as the villages of Shorewood Hills and Maple Bluff, are considered unaffordable due to high home prices, even though their residents are generally wealthier and they are close to many destinations and have nearby transit service. Using the same regional typical household with $72,373 income, 1.25 commuters, and 2.35 individuals in the household, here's the percentage of income that would be required to live in typical housing in each Madison area, city, and village. Typical combined housing and transportation costs exceed 45% of household income in every community except Madison, Fitchburg, Middleton, Monona, Stoughton, and Sun Prairie. Note that all of these communities offer some sort of public transit system, which helps reduce household transportation costs. Verona, the one area community served by transit with combined housing and transportation costs above 45%, is served by metro routes that are designed to transport employees between their residences and other communities and the Epic campus, but it is not served by transit designed to serve local residents. This is something that's worth probably explaining a little bit more. Under state law in the state of Wisconsin, transit agencies can only provide service to communities that are under contract and that pay them for that service. And so, for example, Madison Metro does not stop in Monona because Monona is not a service partner and does not pay. And if Metro did stop there, then it would be in violation of state law. So We have to work with area communities and partner with them and have contractual relationships for those services. Epic, the software company in Verona, pays for 2 bus routes to serve Epic and Epic employees, which happen to pass through Verona and have a few other stops in Verona, but the service is not designed to serve the residents of Verona. It's designed to serve the employees of Epic. So that's an important caveat to just explain a little bit more. Maple Bluff and Shorewood Hills, which are not officially served by Metro, are directly adjacent to Metro routes that can be used by residents. Note that transportation costs for these wealthier communities are comparable to transportation costs for communities with official transit service and lower than transportation costs in other communities without transit service. This map shows the intersection density for the MPO's planning area, as well as identified pedestrian barriers such as major roadways and railroads that significantly inhibit pedestrian travel, and identified existing, deficient, and planned or needed barrier crossings. The image at left shows a pedestrian crossing East Washington Avenue near Melvin Court, Retke Avenue, which is identified as a deficient crossing. This crossing is currently being improved with a center running bus rapid transit station under construction. Intersection density is an indicator of network connectivity, which we will look at more closely in the next slide. Block length and street connectivity form the foundation of overall network connectivity. Blocks that are overly long force out of direction travel, increase the risk of speeding due to infrequent controlled intersections, and limit the route options available to travelers. In the small graphic at the bottom of the slide, the low connectivity neighborhood at left, with its loops and lollipops or dead worm network configuration, forces travelers to take a more circuitous route involving higher traffic streets. The high connectivity neighborhood at right allows travelers to make a much more direct path, often in lower traffic streets. This is why intersection density is considered an indicator of network connectivity, as was shown on the previous slide. In the larger image at top right, you can see both of these development patterns evident in the small gridded downtown of Verona, which is roughly the area in the red box that just popped up, while more recent development around downtown follows the typical auto-centric post-World War II development pattern of dead ends and circuitous routes. Block length and connectivity standards for cities in the Madison urban area are shown in the table at top left, with related recommendations from the Institute of Transportation Engineers. Note that most communities require minimum block lengths of 400 to 600 feet, with maximum lengths of 1,000 to even 1,200 feet, while ITE recommends that mid-block crossings should be considered on any block longer than 400 feet. For area communities, mid-block crossings are generally required on blocks longer than 900 feet. So we're ending up with blocks that are essentially over twice or even 3 times the length of what ITE recommends for a well-connected neighborhood. And oh good, I did put the credit there for the Wasatch Front Regional Council in that little graphic at the bottom. The report to the link on this slide and the previous sought to not only document existing community standards and national best practices, but to also provide information supporting those recommendations and to explain their importance in safe street design. Here are some example figures from the section on speed and its relationship to street width. Think back to the travel time budget of 60 to 90 minutes that most people find acceptable, and how separated uses result in the need for higher travel speeds to stay within the travel time budget. As this slide shows, those higher speeds result in increasing levels of danger for pedestrians and bicyclists. There was actually just recently a really great article or new research that came out. There was an NPR article on it just a couple days ago about how skinny streets save lives. So it's definitely out there. There's a lot of research that's going on this and it's coming out continually. So now for something completely different. Hope you caught my Monty Python reference there. This is, we're gonna move on to active transportation, walking and bicycling. It is important to recognize that every trip begins and ends as a pedestrian, whether walking to a car, a bus stop, or a bike rack. For purposes of transportation planning, the term walking includes the use of wheelchairs and adaptive devices that are appropriate for use on sidewalks. Bicycling includes the use of devices that travel at higher speeds and are appropriate for use on, not appropriate for use on sidewalks, but are generally not appropriate for use in faster or higher volume vehicle traffic. There are a lot of benefits to walking and biking. They're free, relatively expensive. They're best for shorter trips. Again, shorter trips allow slower travel speeds. They're available 24/7. You don't need to look at a bus map or a bus schedule. Accessible facilities are required in compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. They promote mental and physical health. They build community. Vulnerable road users, or VRUs, the new fancy term for these folks. And they are in need of accommodation and protection from those big heavy vehicles. But there are dedicated federal and county funding sources for their construction. And so if you are at all interested in those, please reach out to me and be happy to help you find funding for your projects. All right, and then during early days of COVID, a few of these signs popped up around town. You've now entered the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Silly Walks. Commence silly walking immediately. And just again, the idea that not only is walking healthy, but it can be fun and it can help build community. So as shown in the graphic at the bottom center of this slide, current bicycle planning is based on the concept that there are 4 stages of bicycling comfort. Providing low traffic stress routes encourages the interested but concerned cyclists, who make up more than half the population, to use bicycles for recreation or utilitarian trips. The image at left shows a strong and fearless rider in traffic on Fish Hatchery Road, which is a level of traffic stress 4. The image at right shows rollerbladers and adults and children bicycling on the Capital City Trail, level of traffic stress 1. Note that with adequately maintained facilities, there are many users of this low-stress facility, even on a winter day. Under the MPO's Complete Streets policy, the MPO will not award funding for any roadway project resulting in a level of traffic stress 4. We are happy to work with designers and engineers to ensure project eligibility. Please reach out to us if you have any questions about this. Moving on to transit. So big question is coverage versus ridership. So imagine that you're the transit planner working in this fictional neighborhood. The dots scattered around the map are people and jobs. The 18 buses are the resources the town has to run transit. Compare an imaginary town where transit is run with the goal of maximizing frequency and ridership, the bottom left with the red lines, versus the same town where transit is run with the goal of providing a little service near everyone, the bottom right. The maximum ridership network at left has very frequent service, but only on the roads where most people live and work. The maximum coverage network at right has service on every road, but it doesn't come very often, and it might not be very useful. Madison's pre-transit network redesign system looked a lot more like this and prioritized coverage over ridership. The redesign process resulted in a new system that looks more like the maximum ridership network on the left with some coverage routes. This is the Metro Transit Network plan that went into effect in 2023. Transit service is not provided on the majority of roads in any community. And routes are usually separated by at least 1/2 mile when they run parallel to each other. It is critical to provide accessible pedestrian and bicycle network connections to the transit network. In addition to sidewalks and accessible curbs and loading platforms, connections to and from transit are facilitated by the provision of bicycle storage, preferably covered, and other facilities such as bike share, car share, or park and ride lots. And Steve just made a point, coverage versus ridership is a false choice. Both can be achieved with sufficient investment. Steve, I agree, but the problem is then you also have to have an unlimited pocketbook. If you only have a certain amount of money, you do have to make a choice and there are trade-offs. And okay, there's a question we'll come back to later. All right. Okay, next one. Come on. So for successful transit, lost my place here, sorry about that. So ridership depends on providing access. Current Metro service planning guidelines call for at least 15 boardings per hour, 5,000 jobs served within a 1/4 mile of stops per bus in service, and 5,000 population served within a quarter mile of stops per bus in service. And so if you are looking to add transit or increase transit in your community, you need to plan for density and diversity of land uses along future and existing transit routes. And this is critical for transit to be successful. It needs to be serving adequate people that you're, if not filling the buses, at least putting enough people on them to make it worthwhile for them to be running and using that public investment. Now we're going to move on to parking. Parking is both a transportation and a land use. Typically mandated by local governments with every new development or change in use. It is the only transportation facility required of developments. When somebody wants to build a new building, you don't say, well, you need to get train tickets for everyone, or you need to subsidize an airline. And most developments aren't required to provide bus passes. So, and then a small exception is some local codes are now requiring bike parking, or are allowing bike parking in lieu of automobile parking. So maybe if you put in 5 or 10 bicycle parking spots, then you can put in one less automobile space. But again, traditionally, automobile parking is the only transportation subsidy that is required by local governments of every development within their jurisdictions. One policy is right at the transportation land use connection: relax or remove parking requirements. This is a publication from the American Planning Association, some real experts in the field, and they, I think, hit the nail on the head that by relaxing or removing minimum parking requirements, you can really do a lot to improve affordability of housing. It's not to say that parking won't be built. Developers still want enough amenities for their customers and their clients to be attracted to the project, but they won't have to build empty parking lots or empty parking garages. And so the table at left here is an excerpt from the Village of McFarland's required off-street parking facilities table. Note that requirements such as these are nearly universal among communities. McFarland's only being singled out here because the formatting of their parking requirements was conducive to use in a presentation. Look at a lot of other communities and the way it was set up, it was gonna be a lot harder for me to put in this presentation. So that's why I'm picking on McFarland. They're not the only ones around here. And so you can see that for residential, for elderly or efficiency apartments, 1 space per dwelling. For a 1-bedroom unit, 2 spaces per dwelling. For 2 or more bedrooms, still 2 dwellings per unit. Not sure how they have 2 or more and then 3 and 4, but hey, that's what the code is. I copied it from their code. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 spaces, 4 bedrooms, 3 spaces per dwelling unit. Now, when you think about the cost of parking and the amount of space taken up by surface parking, you can start to see how problematic this becomes. It's approximately $43,000 to $72,000 per space for structured parking. Approximately 300 square feet per space for the space and the aisle. It's estimated nationwide there are as many as 8 parking spaces for each car and light truck in the country. Space used for parking pushes other land uses farther apart, making them less walkable, harder to serve with transit. Free parking encourages driving alone, and ultimately those private parking costs are passed on to tenants and consumers. They're not really free. The image at the right here, I've overlaid an aerial image of the East Town Mall area. Blue is the building footprints, orange are the parking lots. And as you can see, there's a lot more orange than blue. These are typically single-story buildings with surface parking, not structured parking, but what a vast amount of land that's been dedicated to automobile storage. That doesn't even count the roadways or the delivery aisles. This graphic from a 2015 blog post on reinventingparking.org shows the range of rent increases required to pay for a single parking space in a multi-level garage in various US cities, with a national average of $225 a month rent increase to pay for a single parking space. As the blog post concludes, every dollar invested in creating an apartment translates to a higher minimum rent required just to break even. If a developer does not expect a new unit will command this target rent, that potential project will not be built. If the amount of parking can be reduced or eliminated, the money saved on construction will lower the required rent to break even and make some projects viable that were not viable before. More viable projects translates to more units getting built, resulting in greater competition and thus lower local rents if demand holds constant. Of course, in Dane County, we have burgeoning growth, so many more people coming here. Demand is not staying constant. Demand is continuing to go up. So all the more reason to be concerned about these issues. Not only do the costs of providing free parking increase the costs of everything else and push various land uses farther from one another, providing parking physically reduces the capacity for a development to provide increased density or other amenities. The Victoria Transport Policy Institute writes that an effective way to provide affordable housing is to reduce construction costs for moderately priced new units. This increases housing affordability both directly by reducing the cost of the new housing and indirectly by increasing affordable housing supply. The added units do not all need to be affordable themselves, but they free up the older housing stock of housing to be truly affordable. And so now we go back to that, the McFarland slide, and a 3-bedroom unit that requires 3 parking spaces. Well, so, how big is that going to be? 1,000, 1,500 square feet. And you can see that, requiring 3 spaces for that is off the chart and would allow fewer number of units per acre in those developments. So another poll, how do you typically commute to work? And so this one, it's an all that apply. So, if you ride the bus once a year, don't click that. But if, anything else, if you do it 2 or 3 times a week, please go ahead and indicate.
Okay, looks like participation is slowing down, so we'll give it a couple more seconds. So I'll go ahead and end it. See those results, Ben?
Yep, and hopefully everybody else is too. I think we might have double clicked there to share and stop sharing, but it looks like everybody's seeing it now. Okay, so moving on. So here we have from 2017 pre-pandemic and 2021 during pandemic, Dane County and City of Madison commute modes. This is the journey to work table from the American Community Survey 1-year survey. We wanted a quick snapshot in time and not let 5-year average of the 5-year ACS. So in 2017, telecommuting was down at 6%, but in 2021, it was at 27% in the City of Madison and 25% for Dane County. And looking back at what we just had here, so we had 23% of respondents say that they use telework. So a little bit lower. We've been hearing folks are returning to the office, so that's about right. The pandemic really, and those folks who moved to teleworking came from every other mode. And so every other mode saw a reduction where walking in the City of Madison dropped from 10% to 7%, smaller decline in the county from 6 to 5. The bicycling actually held even at 4 and 3% in both time periods. Transit dropped from 9% in the City of Madison and 5% in the county to only 3% in Madison and 1% in Dane County. Carpooling basically got cut in half from 9% to 4% in both areas. And so here, in what we just saw, we have 7% of folks on this call use transit or paratransit. So looks like we're gaining, got some ridership back, which is borne out by Metro's ridership numbers. Nobody's saying they take a taxi or an Uber or a Lyft. 6% saying they're carpooling. So it looks like we're again rebounding there a little bit. That's great. And 27% saying that they take a bicycle, an e-scooter, or something else like that. So there we are definitely out of the norm in this group. We've got a lot more bicyclists and micromobility enthusiasts in this group, which makes sense considering the the group that we're working with here today. So great job, everybody, on all of your active transportation. So moving on to what other folks are actually doing in the county. And this is 5-year data from 2021. So a little bit more reliable than that 1-year snapshot that was used in the last one. And these slides, the orange horizontal bar represents the percent of the overall Dane County population that is within this demographic group. So on the left, Black or African American, about 4% of Dane County's population is Black or African American, about 5% is Asian, and just over 6% is Hispanic or Latino. And so that's sort of the threshold of where we would expect if everybody was traveling the same, regardless of their race or ethnicity, then all of these blue bars would be at the same point, but they're not. We see that Black and African Americans are slightly underrepresented in driving alone. They're slightly overrepresented in carpooling, and they're very overrepresented in relying on public transportation, where 4% of the population accounts for 8% or almost 9% of transit ridership in the county. Asian, very similar, even fewer folks driving alone, not quite as many carpooling, a very large number relying on public transportation, over 15% when the population is just about 5%. And then in the Hispanic population, we see that actually it's carpooling that is what a lot of Hispanic folks rely on. Car, truck, drive alone, public transportation, pretty close to the representation in the county, but nearly 12% of Latino folks are, I'm sorry, nearly 12% of carpooling in the county is done by Hispanic or Latino population. See this very similar thing with income. There are marked differences between commute modes of persons at various income levels. These charts show public transportation is used by people below 100% of the poverty level at nearly 3 times the rate that population composes of the county population. This group is less likely to drive alone than their representation of the population. Public transit is still important for folks who are earning between 100 and 149% of the poverty level, with carpooling being used for the journey to work nearly as frequently as transit. At or above 150% of the poverty level, driving alone becomes more common than the population as a component of total county population, carpooling being slightly less common, and public transit being used less frequently. This data reinforces that lower income populations are more frequently transit dependent and experience less freedom of access than higher income populations. Unfortunately, some important metrics such as travel time to work by race or ethnicity, income, or poverty level are not available from the ACS. Historic Madison Metro rider surveys have shown that Black and African American transit riders require longer to make their trips on transit than do white riders, and that they must transfer at higher rates than white riders do. The Metro Transit Network redesign aimed to improve equity in transportation access and to reduce the number of transfers required for trips to and from areas with high minority and low income populations. So all of that, a way forward. It's really important to cite land uses based on proximity to other uses and services. It is, I would say, critical to reduce or eliminate minimum parking requirements. Establishing maximum parking limits is also a good idea. Ensuring street, sidewalk, and bicycle network connectivity. Aiming for context-sensitive roadway design. Encouraging mixed-use development. And focusing development in centers and corridors. So here we have the Capital Area Regional Planning Commission's long-range land use plan, the 2050 Regional Development Framework. It was developed in concert with the MPO's Connect Greater Madison 2050 Regional Transportation Plan, and both of those plans plan for future growth to be targeted in the centers and corridors shown in this map. So these are great places to target with denser zoning and more mixture of uses, and again, looking at the roadway design to make sure that it's really appropriate for all of these other transportation modes. One concept that's come to recent public awareness is that of the 15-minute city. Everyone living in a city should have access to essential urban services within a 15-minute walk or bike. The 15-minute city project is designed to help access-focused urban transformations be what we need them to be: ambitious, inclusive, measurable, and effectively implemented. I believe that this sort of took off in Paris, where there really are, because Paris is so old, it was designed to be a walkable city. And so there really are a lot of mixture of uses, and you can get from wherever you are to pretty much anything you might need within a 15-minute walk, bicycle, or bus trip. Another concept that you've probably all heard a lot about is transit-oriented development. Transit-oriented development traditionally is described as having 3 Ds: density, diversity, and design. It requires density of jobs and services, density of residences, diversity of both land uses and resident demographics. And then the design needs to be human scale, needs to have good amenities, and be context sensitive. TOD does not have to be comprised of tall buildings in city centers. It can be applied in communities of any size and can be composed of mixed uses on adjacent properties or within a single development. Note the 2 to 3 story buildings in Banff, Alberta, where shops and restaurants on the ground floor have residences and offices above, compared to the recently opened The Ella in Madison, which has retail and restaurant space on the ground floor and 4 stories of residences above. Benefits of transit-oriented development include housing and mobility choices, environmental performance, infrastructure cost savings, supporting healthy lifestyles, strengthening transit systems, creating lasting value, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The City of Madison Transit-Oriented Development Overlay Zone, which was adopted in January of this year, generally encompasses areas within 1/4 mile of Metro's frequent service network, where buses come every 15 minutes or less. In the East Town Mall area and south of Mineral Point Road, the zone is enlarged to encompass larger areas with high development and redevelopment potential. This overlay zone increases the number of by right dwellings that may be constructed in single-family zones, increases height and density limits in other zones. The City of Madison does not have minimum parking requirements in many zoning districts, although use-specific parking requirements do exist. There are no parking minimums at all and reduced parking maximums within the TOD overlay zone, that red boundary there. So do you want to build transit-oriented development? The US DOT says don't wait. Through its Build America Bureau, US DOT can provide low-interest loans for mixed income and affordable housing projects near transit stations. Technical assistance is available in addition to financing for projects. So if you're interested, please, once we get this link published, I'll leave it up here for a little bit. Make a note, US DOT Build America Bureau. I think it's the first time that US DOT has gotten involved in housing development, but they recognize that it's critical to the future of our transportation systems and resilience and sustainability. So please take a look at that. And with that, thank you for joining the webinar. I hope you found it informative and inspiring, and we'll go on to questions now. I think we've only got one right now in the Q&A.
Yeah, so Ben, I've been tracking the Q&A, and they're sort of building upon each other related to the parking requirements. Appreciating that people involved can recognize the concept, but that you laid out. But one interesting question came from Regina, who noted that oftentimes it's difficult to convince those who finance development of this concept. So this isn't an unfamiliar situation in which people in our line of work and planners and designers and housing advocates appreciate these concepts. Developers do as well, but they are, limited or constrained, or can be constrained by financing. So it's an interesting topic. I just wanted to throw it out there. I'm certainly not the expert on this, but I just wanted to sort of summarize that item as a question. So any question you might have, and we can go from there.
I think that the important thing is to, some communities, City of Portland, Oregon has established parking maximums. So in the downtown area, I think they might have already hit it. You can't build more parking. They have the parking they have, and then otherwise, if you want more parking, you have to figure out how to get people to where they're going. That's not how most places operate. Portland, I think we'll all agree, is a very, very unique community and area. What's much more common is to eliminate parking requirements. That doesn't mean developers aren't going to build parking. People who have restaurants that are in areas like the Easttown Mall, they know that most of their customers are going to be arriving by car, and so they're going to want convenient parking there. However, they're also going to look across the street at acres of empty parking that's not being utilized and say, why would I want to take half or 3/4 of my lot and dedicate that to asphalt that I have to maintain and pick up garbage and remove junk cars and have it lit, and I have to maintain it and remove snow, and I have to salt it in the winter, when the cities require me that I have 2 parking spaces per 500 square feet. And I feel like I'm not going to have that kind of demand. There's a new bus rapid transit station that's across the street. I'm on a bike path. And so allowing the developer and allowing the end user of the property to say, I don't really need 20 parking spaces for this restaurant. I think 5 or 10 will do. Again, that then impacts the cost of the hamburger at the restaurant. It allows other uses to go into the space that would have been taken up by a much larger parking lot. And so it can be difficult for lenders. If you go in and you say, I don't want to build any parking, the lender's gonna say, well, how are you gonna succeed? On the other hand, to go in and say, I have a business case, this is how much parking I expect I'm going to need, because I'm going to be working with some number of units are going to be affordable. And we know that people in this population bracket, or this income bracket, are less likely to own cars. We also know that just because there are 3 bedrooms doesn't mean that everyone who uses that bedroom is going to be driving. If it's a family there, you're going to have quite a few years where the kids in those other bedrooms are much too young to be driving automobiles. They don't need their own parking space. And when they get older and they're in high school, then they get a car, then maybe somebody else in the house or in the development has retired and their vision is gone and they're not driving anymore. They're now relying on paratransit or public transportation. So the developer can go in, make a business case and say, the city doesn't have a requirement. They used to have a requirement that I build 200 parking spaces, but I'm gonna try and build 150 and see how that goes. So it needs to be a discussion. Some lenders are more open to it than others.
So Ben, real quick, and then take Olivia's question. Someone asked that you go back to that TOD map real quickly in your slide deck. And then Olivia, go ahead, and then I have a question to read from Rich.
I just had a quick question, Ben. You brought up this the design of the older subdivision, or the older community, and the newer community that has more grid work. And then you also talked about the width of streets in terms of safety. But I'd be super interested to hear a little bit more, and maybe we don't have time, I know we're kind of running out, but about the cost. Like you talk about parking, the reduced parking requirements, reducing costs, but smaller street widths probably also not only increase safety, but bring down the cost. I don't know if that was part of your discussion, but it'd be great to hear whatever your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I'm not an engineer, and I don't have to balance the books on individual roadway projects, so I couldn't tell you what the cost differential is for one additional foot of width of a roadway, but clearly it adds up. A 24-foot wide roadway is going to cost, just for asphalt, not the labor, not the grading, not the right of way. It's going to cost 2/3 as much as a 36-foot wide road just to pave. So, I think the math there is fairly straightforward. And again, when looking at parking, if it's a neighborhood that has on-street parking, then sure, the roadway is going to be a little bit wider, but that's another reason to not require so much off-street parking. And if you have an area that is developed that has lots of off-street parking and also has on-street parking, you'll often see that the on-street parking is not utilized, which results in a visibly wider right-of-way that drivers pass down much faster. And that's one of the things in the report. We did it in 2020. The links are again in the presentation. But it was a survey of all the communities in our planning area and their existing standards for roadway width, sidewalk width, snow removal, a whole lot of things, curb return radius. And we're going to be updating that next year with some other policies based on the research done with Divided by Design, or I'm sorry, Arrested Mobility, with the idea that certain, that communities have adopted enforceable laws about trick riding or riding bicycles on sidewalks or prohibiting the use of scooters, and that these things tend to impact lower income and minority populations much more, and that they further restrict the ability of these populations to get around in their communities safely and efficiently.
Alex, did you want to say something? I wanted to keep us on time here, make sure we have some time for our last
I had a
poll.
few more questions in the Q&A, and then maybe just so people, and then one that is in our web chat. So I mentioned Rich's, and he's talking about, it says getting infill sidewalks constructed in older neighborhoods is difficult. Madison City Engineering constructs infill sidewalks very reluctantly due to the conflict that arises in that case. What would it take to mandate infill sidewalk construction on both sides of every street within the next, within and near the transit overlay zone? So as some of us know, obviously sidewalks become surprisingly controversial. So that's question number one. The second question is from Brandy, who I think maybe is more following what you just talked about, which is concerns about pedestrian and bicycle safety when we do have lower parking requirements, thus more people are parking on the street. And I think that's one of those perceptions about how that impacts bike ped safety. So if you could speak to those two to whatever amount of time you have, and that would be, those would complete our questions for.
So sidewalks, retrofitting communities with sidewalks is always going to be tricky. There are a few different communities that have gone different ways on that recently. I think Monona, Sun Prairie, and Fitchburg, I could be wrong here, I think all three of those, the cost of sidewalk construction is borne by the city, and they don't ask the individual property owners to pay for it. But because they tend to be so controversial anyway, certainly Fitchburg and Sun Prairie have been doing a lot of separated paths, because the separated paths they can then be maintained by the city. You just drive a plow truck down it, and you don't have people complaining that they're going to have to be out shoveling a sidewalk that they don't want and don't use. The city of Madison recently changed their sidewalk assessment policy. It used to be that the adjacent property owner would pay 50% of the cost of the sidewalk. That is recently removed. The city now pays 100% of the sidewalk, but the adjacent property owner pays a percentage of the cost of, I think, the first 10 feet of travel lane in the roadway. And since generally people are not complaining because they don't have to maintain it, makes it a little bit easier of a political sale. That said, it's always uphill. People are going to be complaining about their landscaping, even if it's in the right of way and not on their own property. Old street trees, we certainly don't want to be cutting down, but again, there's a safety issue. You really have to deal with it on a context sensitive case by case basis. Every neighborhood's going to be different. Sometimes you just need to recognize that people are unhappy about it and you're not going to win. Maybe you can come back in 20 years and add a sidewalk. Sorry, what was the next question was on? Parking and safety. Certainly, getting doored while you're driving and somebody opens their car door in front of you, when you're biking and you flip over, that's a bad thing. Bicyclists don't like that. However, on-street parking actually creates friction so that passing motorists tend to drive more slowly because there are these odd things that are irregular on the side of the road, and that they're also worried about somebody opening a car door and stepping out, or they can't see if, you know, somebody was to walk around the corner of was an Amazon delivery truck, and like, well, is the driver going to like step out into the roadway? And so it creates a little bit of uncertainty, which tends to cause drivers to slow down a little bit, which is a huge safety improvement. Better yet, protected bike lanes. You know, put the bike lane between the sidewalk and the parking, and then have the parking protecting the bike lane from the automobile traffic. There are innovative ways to address those concerns. It sounds like we're out of time, and that's all we can do for questions. One last poll. Once again, thanks everybody for bearing with us and participating today.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and put this poll up for everyone who is still with us. This is asking about interest in webinar topics for 2024. So we would love to have your input on this. We'll also send this out with the follow-up email, so you'll have a chance to participate there as well. But if you'd like to give us your feedback now, please go ahead and do so. And if there's a topic that you don't see here that you would like to add, go ahead and put that in the chat. There were a number of questions that we didn't get to, really good questions, and some really good kind of responses and additional info in the chat. So we'll gather all that together, and we'll put some notes together for the questions that we didn't get a chance to respond to, and send that out also with our follow-up email. So thank you all so much for joining us, and I'll just let this poll go for another 30 seconds or so. Fantastic, 100% participation. All right.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great
Yes,
afternoon.
thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day. We'll be in touch soon.